Hey everyone, it's Skipper Mark, and today we're going to take Matt's Jeep from this to this. I forgot to mention this in my introduction, but the total project took about 5 hours to complete. This included Matt taking some snack breaks and also getting out and putting away all the tools. About a year ago, Matt put a 3/4 inch lift on his Jeep. It's a 2015 Wrangler Rubicon Hard Rock JK, and he liked the 3/4 inch, but he said it wasn't enough. So he just recently purchased this one. It's by AEV, which is a company that is known in the Mopar industry in the Jeep field. They actually designed the bumper hoop that's on one of the anniversary editions of the Jeep, and they also designed the steel bumper that is on the Hard Rock Jeep that Matt has, and that design carried over to the JLs. He went with this company because he felt that they were a reliable brand, and obviously if Mopar trusts him, he felt that he could too. Hey, can we measure it? Get a tape measure.
You measure the bottom of the flare. The back is higher.
So the instructions say you want to start on the back, finish that, and then move to the front. So the first thing Matt did was jack up the truck and then take off his tires. You always want to put a wedge under the tires that aren't being jacked up so the vehicle doesn't roll. When Matt lowers the truck onto the jack stands, he always goes very slowly. He also likes to put a second jack under the frame as a backup. The next step is to take off the bracket that holds the brake line to the frame. Now you want to take off the bottom bolt on the shock absorber, and then the bottom bolt of the end link. The directions say to loosen all 8 control arm bolts plus the track bar bolts, but Matt didn't do this. He would have done it if it needed to get the axle to drop more, but it didn't. At this point, you're actually ready to lower the axle, and when Matt does this, he is very careful. As he's lowering the axle, he stops every couple inches and checks to make sure there's no wires or cables or anything pulling that shouldn't. And if there is, he stops and fixes it so that it's not a problem. If the axle is low enough, the spring should come right out. On the passenger side, Matt had to kneel on the brake assembly to get the spring out. This is the old 3/4 lift that Matt had on the Jeep. Inside the box are spacers, brackets, and a bunch of bolts. The rear spacers have the smaller center hole, the front has the larger hole. These are the old spacers from the 3/4 inch lift to compare hole sizes. You can either take out or leave in the factory spring isolator. Matt left it in to keep the original rake angle of the Jeep. If you choose to leave in the factory spring isolator, it fits into the new spacer on the top. The spring should fit into place relatively easily. You put the top in first, and then the bottom should pop right into place. For the passenger side spring, Matt had to sit on the axle to get it to slip into place. The next step is to install new bump stop spacers, but before Matt put them in, he protected the area with undercoating. The bump stop spacers mount into 2 factory holes on the frame. Then there's just 2 bolts that you tighten up and torque underneath them. Next, you want to install the shock spacers, but unfortunately for us, the included bolts were about 1/4 inch too short, so Nancy went to Home Depot to pick up 4 longer ones. Matt had her get grade A bolts. As you can see, the bolts barely stick out the top, and Matt didn't want just 1 or 2 threads holding in the shock.
That don't look no right.
Because this was the last step to complete and the shocks can be installed when the truck is on the ground, Matt left them off and put everything back together. Here Matt is installing and torquing the lower end link bolts, reinstalling the brake line brackets, and putting on the wheels. So everything is bolted back on. The torquing is all done, and Matt's ready to lower it down. Again, he's very careful and constantly checks to make sure nothing's in the way and going to cause a problem. Alright, well here it is. The back is done, and it definitely looks higher. Total time was about 1.5 hours. At this point we were ready to start working on the front, so Matt jacked it up and secured it with jack stands and wheel chocks. The instructions said to loosen the control arm and track bar bolts and actually take out one of the track bar bolts, but Matt chose not to do that. The front has a lot of connections that need to be unplugged or loosened, such as speed sensors, brake cables, and other things. So be sure to look around and make sure that you don't miss anything that can stretch or break when the axle is lowered. After disconnecting everything, Matt took out the lower bolt on the shock absorber. The directions say to completely take it out, but he only took out the lower bolt. Next, he removed the bottom bolt from the end links on both the driver and passenger side. The last step before lowering the axle is to remove the brake line brackets that are bolted to the frame. As with the rear, Matt takes his time lowering the axle and keeps checking to make sure there's no cables or anything attached that needs to be loosened or unhooked. If the axle is low enough, the spring should come out fairly easily. You want to leave the factory isolator in place. Unlike in the rear where the bump stop spacers bolted into existing holes, in the front you have to drill a 3/8 inch hole to bolt them to the frame. They don't tell you exactly where to position them, so Matt lined them up and then used his drill to make a mark on the metal where the hole needed to be drilled. And then he used a punch to make a dent so the drill wouldn't slip around when drilling. This left some bare metal exposed, and Matt didn't want it to rust, so he painted the freshly drilled area and then covered it with undercoating spray. When you install the front springs in the new spacer, you have to keep the factory isolator in place. You also have to properly index the springs on the lower spring seat. Once the springs were in place, Matt tightened the bolts on the new bump stop and secured them in place.
Now it's threading very easy, but when it started it wasn't, so now I can just hold the nut with my hand. And you have to, hold on,
Next step was to install the new end link brackets. They have a torque spec, so Matt made sure they were torqued properly. All the torque specs for everything are in the back of the instructions. The The next step was to attach the end links to the new end link brackets that just got installed.
If you're asking.
Next, Matt installed the supplied shock extension brackets and then attached the shocks to them. These brackets are directional and have a proper side, so be sure to install them properly. Also, you want to be sure to insert the supplied spacer on the bottom hole. This is a very important step that you don't want to miss, and it's not specifically mentioned in the instructions. Next, you want to reattach the shock and torque the bolts to the proper specs. For 2007 through 2010 vehicles, you need to install a new front brake line drop bracket. For 2011 and newer vehicles, you zip tie the brake lines to the shock. Before lowering down the truck, Matt did a final walk around and made sure the springs were properly indexed and reconnected any cables or sensors that had been unhooked. Because his Jeep has aftermarket wheel spacers, Matt used this opportunity to check and torque them to the proper specs. He actually torques them whenever he takes off the wheels. At this point, the lift is pretty much done and you can put on the wheels and do a final walk around to check for any issues before lowering it to the ground. Because Matt had left off the rear shocks, he still had to put those on using the new bolts from Home Depot. We were anxious to see the height, so he quickly torqued the front wheels and then we measured. 39 inches in the front and 39.5 inches in the rear. A gain of 1.5 inches in the front and rear over the 3/4 inch lift that was previously installed. So as you can see, the Jeep is definitely taller. It's not like going with a 4-inch lift like when he did the lift on his pickup truck, which coincidentally I'll link to up above, but it's definitely bigger. And when he needs to get new tires, it'll allow him to put slightly bigger ones on. So overall, I think it looks pretty good. What do you all think? Leave a message in the comments and I'd love to hear. Thanks for watching and have a great day. If you have any questions, please leave a message in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer and try to help out any way I can. As always, thanks for watching and have a great day.